the words of interposition and nullification.
The American dream was to seek equality, to be treated and given the same opportunity as anybody else, irregardless of the color of my skin.
They will do whatever it takes to make them successful. So what that means is that they will feel equal. They will feel that there is nothing that can stop me. It doesn't matter.
We should aim to look beyond race, this category that in many respects, even biologically, doesn't have any significance. And yet it has been pervasive in the way that we evaluate and discriminate, often. So if it was an important turning point to a society that could look beyond race, although we're certainly far.
The civil rights movement that began in the 1960s embodied the struggle for equity in the United States. It strived to create social equality for all, despite certain institutional powers that specifically affected African Americans and their pursuit towards equal opportunities. This movement was responsible for shaping the definition of the American dream.
The civil rights movement introduced this concept of racial equality amongst society, which was essential towards creating the foundation of the American dream. I believe that it was something that was strived by many and was definitely worth its long and rigorous fight.
During this riotous period in time, society treated African Americans differently by restricting their rights to vote, segregating them in schools, and denying their access to public services. These degrading behaviors led to an era of rebellion that started in the 1960s. In attempts to eliminate the segregation laws, African Americans held boycotts and protests to gather support for change. Music influenced the civil rights movement positively because it was used to inspire supporters. Music was something that could unite civil rights participants. It was a primary tool that was helpful towards gathering support for change. Participants in the movement were responsible for utilizing instruments while combining them with powerful lyrics to address specific instances of segregation. During this time, bands like the Blind Boys of Alabama were created, whose songs supported the ultimate ideal of the movement, which was freedom.
Everybody put your hands together. Hey, I'm free at last. Hey. One day.
Artists like the Blind Boys applied their music in the form of freedom songs that were sung proudly during protests and boycotts. Freedom songs were specifically significant during the March on Washington, which took place on August 28, 1963. The March on Washington was a formal demonstration of opposing racial discrimination. The songs represented the African American struggles and hopes to eliminate all types of segregation. Amongst these forms of segregation, one was the separation of races in schools. Brown versus the Board of Education was a case that fought to desegregate public schools. During the 1950s, segregation at schools had become a big problem due to the unfair conditions pressed upon the black communities.
When the Brown versus Board of Education occurred, their thought was that if we make it an open system and we bus kids and we integrate our schools, then kids will have equal access to that material. I don't think that has totally happened. Even through all of these years, I still don't think it has happened. I think the goal was there, the intent was there. The implementation of it, though, has been challenging.
Many of these problems led to cases that were won by a well-known lawyer and member of the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, who would later become the very first African-American Supreme Court justice. On May 14, 1954, Chief Justice Earl Warren spoke for the whole court when he stated, "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal." This was in favor of Brown and any other supporters of desegregation in many cases. This ruling represented segregation as a violation of the 14th Amendment. The conditions of colored facilities and schools were inferior compared to whites, and this violated equity.
Well, I know doors have been opened because of the civil rights movement. Because probably, if there had never been a civil rights movement, we'd probably still be living like in the South, and with that same mentality.
As an American tragedy, and throughout the nation, even in Canada, there were marches through the streets of towns and cities. New York's Harlem, more than 15,000, half of them white, filed somberly through the streets in quiet but agonized protest. From Selma's 14,000 Negroes, only a few more than 300 had been registered at the polls. When one group set out to march to the Capitol at Montgomery, the procession was broken up violently by state troopers and sheriff's deputies.
You can never whip these buds if you don't keep you and them separate. I found that out in Birmingham. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
Equity is a significant ideal that was sought by many different social movements during the 20th century in hopes to realize the American dream. The African American civil rights movement serves as a strong influence which motivated other oppressed minorities to demand the same civil liberties. These movements represent how important civil equity is to the pursuit of the American dream, and they represent how determined people can attain it.